Good evening, and welcome to the American Antiquarian Society for our inaugural Julian L. Lapides Lecture in Children's Literature. We come to you tonight from the ancestral homelands of the Nipmuc tribal community, which remains a vibrant presence here in central Massachusetts. I'm delighted to welcome all of you who are with us in Antiquarian Hall and also those who are watching on YouTube. Children's literature has been part of the American Antiquarian Society since we were founded in Worcester in 1812. Children's books, especially textbooks, were a staple of our founder Isaiah Thomas's printing business. They helped underwrite the income with which he bought so many other printed works. Interestingly, though, Thomas didn't collect or keep many books for children, even those he had published himself. It fell to Clarence Brigham, librarian and then director of AAS from 1908 to 1959, to build our children's literature collection, aided by the advice and generosity of collectors such as Wilbur Macy Stone, D'Alto Welch, Ruth Adamite, Elizabeth Ball, and Herbert Hosmer. Over the 20th century, this collection became one of AAS's gems and one of the nation's strongest. And we have not slowed down in the 21st. Our lecture tonight is made possible by another great collector in this pantheon. Linda F. Lapides and her late husband Julian L. Lapides, known as Jack, have been dear friends and benefactors of AAS for many decades. To say that Linda collects American children's books would be an understatement. Linda knows American children's books. Her research into them is deep and wide-ranging, and her curiosity is unbounded. Linda champions this field, which for many years was a poor stepchild in the world of research libraries and scholarship. She knows that every important development in American society and culture can be seen through its children's books. In 1986, that is almost 40 years ago, Jack and Linda established a fund at AAS for the purchase of post-1850 children's books. Today, our children's literature collection numbers some 35,000 books, thanks in great measure to the Lapides' generosity. In 2012, they created and endowed the Lapides Fellowship in pre-1900 juvenile literature and ephemera. And last year, Linda endowed a second Lapides Fellowship in children's literature. At the same time, she endowed a regular lecture in children's literature named for Jack, who was a Maryland state senator, attorney, and historic preservationist, and, for our purposes, also served on the AAS Council, that is our board of directors, for 20 years, more than 20 years. He chaired the council from 2003 to 2008. Jack, unfortunately, passed away in 2021. Thanks to Linda, we will host a Lapides lecture every other year, starting tonight. I'm only sorry that Linda couldn't be here to share this evening with us in person, but I'm happy to report that she's watching the live stream from Baltimore, and so I hope that you will all join me in thanking Linda Lapides for her and Jack's exceptional contributions to AAS, including this evening's lecture. A great collection and great friends like Jack and Linda Lapides are two legs of the tripod that makes AAS the premier destination to study historic American children's literature. The third leg of that tripod is Laura Wazowitz, our unparalleled curator of children's literature. Laura joined AAS in 1987 as a cataloger for the children's literature collection, and several years later was promoted to curator. In that role, she has built the collection, thanks in large measure to Jack and Linda's generous endowment, and cataloged its materials. She's also become a leading scholar of American children's literature, publishing articles in academic books and journals, and delivering lectures at conferences and bookish gatherings. Laura is our own great champion for this collection. She ensures that every research fellow at AAS knows there's children's literature related to their topic, no matter what that topic is. Over 4 decades, Laura Wazowitz and Linda Lapides have become dear friends, which is testimony to the relationships that underpin everything we do here at AAS. And so There is nobody more suited to introduce tonight's inaugural Lapides lecture than Laura Lewozowitz, and it's my privilege to turn the podium over to her.
Hello, Linda. I'm thinking of you. All right, now to our friend Justin Schiller. Justin G. Schiller's journey as a bibliophile began when he was 8 years old and started collecting Wizard of Oz books. His interest in the children's fantasy series by L. Frank Baum continued to grow, and at the age of 13, he founded the International Wizard of Oz Club, which still exists. In 1960, Schiller opened his rare book firm, Justin Schiller Limited, the oldest antiquarian book firm in the United States, continuously specializing in rare and collectible children's books in all languages and covering all time periods. He has published widely on the history, collecting, and appraisal of children's books. I first met Justin when I visited his shop early in my career at AAS. He enthusiastically showed me around, and I thought to myself, oh my, I have a lot to learn. Over nearly 4 decades, Justin has inspired me through his knowledgeable book quotes and his endowment of a fellowship and book award supporting research using historical children's literature. He was elected to the American Antiquarian Society in October 1984. It is my great pleasure to introduce Justin Schiller.
My father was wounded at the Battle of Normandy, the second week of June 1944, and spent 6 months in recovery at an army hospital. Thank goodness for that, since during the following weeks, most of his infantry battalion was lost. My mother wanted a house for his eventual return home, and with modest savings, she purchased a semi-detached bungalow on the outskirts of Brooklyn near Floyd Bennett Field. My elementary school was only a half block away, and the surrounding neighborhood was Italian, which seemed friendly and family-oriented. During the late 1940s, we were the only Jewish family in that area. Most of my teachers were Jewish, and unintentionally, they encouraged me to become a reader. Books became my constant companion. My father's family was Orthodox Jews, originally from Austria, while on my mother's side, they were Reformed. Like other children in our neighborhood, I grew up with a Christmas tree and believing in the Easter Bunny. My father was first-generation American and the youngest of 5, while both my mother and I were only children. I was named after my mother's father, Justin Galland, who was in the first graduation class of Cornell Law School, 1893. We were somehow related to the Gimbel's department store family, but I never knew how. It was difficult making friends, and one of my earliest memories was my mother organizing a birthday party for me, but needing to give presents to the neighborhood children to have them attend. There was a middle-aged woman on our street who had polio. She seemed to live alone and moved around on her hands and knees, making some money selling magazine subscriptions over the telephone. My mother would leave me with her to babysit when my grandmother was ill, which allowed her to visit Nana and know I was safe. Eventually, a neighbor whose family was Pennsylvania Dutch became my caregiver and moved into our house to look after me once my mother began to work. She cooked my food and did our laundry. Our family was not wealthy, but living with Kate was not an expensive obligation, and she stayed with us until I went off to college. Besides going to school, I occupied myself learning to read from my grandfather's Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition. The articles newly researched and expanded, although the texts were already several decades old. It caused me to have many interests, which stimulated my collecting Wizard of Oz books, just as a child might collect coins or stamps. I discovered that the American author L. Frank Baum had written a dozen more Oz stories in the series, and after his death, other writers continued, so altogether there were nearly 40 different titles. One of these authors lived in Manhattan. His name was Jack Snow, and I got to know him during the middle 1950s. My parents would invite him for dinner once a month, and in between we spoke over the telephone. He always complained about receiving constant mail from Oz readers, and once commented that he wished they would form a club and write to each other, leaving him alone. He died unexpectedly and prematurely at age 48 in 1956, and that was how I had the idea to create an Oz Club. I was 13 years old at the time and wrote to everyone who had corresponded with Jack in the past 5 years. By January 1957, we had 16 members, and I'm pleased to say that the club still exists with several hundred members throughout the United States and Canada, besides various European countries. In anticipation of attending college, and along with the support of my parents, I helped finance my education by selling old books, from second-hand copies of the Oz series to 18th and 19th century titles purchased while strolling the bookstalls along New York's Fourth Avenue and London's Charing Cross Road. I was somewhat introverted growing up, so books continued to be my companion, and I explored the world of reading into adulthood. My mentor in school, Dr. John Harcourt, instilled in me an appreciation for the beauty in Shakespeare's writing, and I was very fortunate to be one of two American students selected to participate in the 1964 Quadricentenary celebration, marking the 400-year anniversary of Shakespeare's birth. Under the auspices of the University of Birmingham in England, but based at Stratford-on-Avon, I studied with Kenneth Muir, one of the editors of the Ardent Shakespeare, and lived in a local boarding house occupied by several actors. During those weeks, we watched all of the literary plays performed twice, and sneered as the daily tour buses pulled into town filled with tourists who wanted to experience village life during the late 16th century. The actors who lived in my house tried to teach me the game of cricket, but I was no good at sports and preferred less challenging exercises. During that summer, I learned the meaning of a British word, weir, W-E-I-R. A fellow student studying with me at Stratford suggested that we go punting on the River Avon to cool down during the July-August heat. I had never tried punting before, as it was where one uses long, narrow poles to propel a boat through the water. We took turns slowly pushing ourselves along the outer banks, when I saw a wooden sign posted that read, "Beware the weir." Not knowing what that meant, and whether or not it was to be taken seriously, I simply ignored it. But I soon discovered that a weir is something not to be ignored. A small barrier built across a stream or river to control and rise the water level, essentially a small-sized dam, and that sign referred to a hidden waterfall nearby. Slowly, the boat began to accelerate, and it became necessary to grab hold of the overhanging limbs of trees to bring us back to the shore, or else we would have capsized. This was a short-lived adventure, but I have never forgotten, and how quickly my career as an antiquarian bookseller could have ended at age 21, even before it seriously began. 1964 was not only an anniversary year for William Shakespeare, but he shared the birth year with another Elizabethan playwright, Christopher Marlowe. In a relatively brief career, Marlowe composed a quantity of popular plays: Faust, Tamburlaine the Great, The Jew of Malta, and Edward II, to name a few, besides writing epic poetry like Hero and Leander and The Passionate Pilgrim. He died in a tavern brawl in 1593 at age 29. Marlowe was long associated with the city of Canterbury, so while I was at Stratford, I traveled one weekend several hours to see what festivities might be happening there in his honor. Unfortunately, there was nothing, and not even a revival of one of his plays. And I returned with the disappointment of uncovering only a car dealership with the name Marlowe Motors, which I am certain made no intended reference to the Elizabethan Shakespeare contemporary. I have been asked many times how I happened to choose handling children's books as my specialty, and that has become a wonderful serendipitous accident. After graduate school, I abandoned my career as an academic, and having built up a small inventory, I was elected a member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America in February 1967. At age 23, I was then the youngest bookseller in that organization and had already begun issuing catalogs on a variety of subjects. One of them was on children's books, and shortly thereafter, I received a letter from the Marquis publishing firm in Chicago saying that I had been nominated to be in their regional Who's Who in the East. Not realizing this was a marketing ploy to sell copies of their reference book, I believed someone actually nominated me because of my children's book catalog. So I felt honored and consequently obligated that this should become my specialty. Much to my surprise, when the book was issued and I looked through it to identify other booksellers, I could find no one else in my profession. But by that time, I had already committed myself to studying the history of children's literature, and gradually over time, my biographical entry would get extended to Who's Who in American Education, and eventually the national Who's Who in America. I wrote articles on various authors, artists, genres, and collectibles, with reports and analysis of the antiquarian children's book field, including annual children's book auction summaries and reviews in trade journals, including A.B. Bookman's Weekly from 1971 to 1989. I also had the opportunity of meeting Maurice Sendak early in my career. He designed several catalog covers for my business, and in turn, we represented him in selling his original artwork and promoting his new books on publication day, where clients could order signed copies. This began with Night Kitchen in 1970, which was also the year I opened my bookshop in New York City, and this friendship continued until his death 13 years ago. One incident I have never forgotten was during the publication day party for In the Night Kitchen. We took out a small advertisement in the New York Times book review, and so great was Sendak's popularity, we received nearly 400 orders. We had arranged with the publisher for only 100 copies of the book, so Maurice kindly agreed to come back another day and sign the remaining orders, along with a check for $4.95 plus postage. One client asked if we could ask Mr. Sendak to write the following message in her copy. To Mary, thanks for a wonderful night, Maurice Sendak. When Maurice got to this request, he was obviously flustered and asked me if I knew Mary. Of course I didn't. He asked what he should do, and I suggested just signing his name would be sufficient. But Maurice never liked disappointing anyone, so indeed, he signed her book to Mary, thanks for a wonderful night, Maurice Sendak. Eventually, that book will show up one day on the second-hand marketplace and get misconstrued as representing something other than it actually was. We had one of the very first bookstores handling primarily antiquarian children's books in New York, and it was no simple circumstance. Although our catalogs guaranteed accurate descriptions, clients had their own excuses for returning purchases. One buyer asked to return a book because they didn't like the way the story ended. Somebody else returned another book because it illustrated a snake, and they didn't like snakes. Of course, we always took books back, whatever the clients didn't want. One day we were visited by a new buyer looking for a middle 19th century chromolithograph book with full-page color-printed pictures. I knew what he wanted, and we had just cataloged such a volume for $30. He was delighted. Yes, he said, this is exactly what I want. The pictures will look very attractive in my child's nursery. I said, excuse me? I asked him to explain, and he said that he would, his intention was to remove the illustrations and put them in frames. At that point, I took the book away from him and explained I couldn't sell it to him. He became angered and insisted on knowing an explanation. So I explained my obligation was so to preserve these books and not sell them to be destroyed or mutilated, similar to how a doctor would look to save a patient. He demanded I sell him the book, and I told him no, and just put the book away. He left our shop, but about 10 minutes later, he returned with a policeman in full uniform. The officer asked me about the problem, so I explained to him similarly, trying to preserve that which I have pledged to devote my life to, of saving old books. If I was to sell my books to this man, I now know it would be destroyed as a book, so I couldn't do that. The customer spoke up and said the book was priced and he was willing to pay the price and demanded that policemen help him. After a bit of reflection, the officer turned to the customer and said he understood the situation, but ultimately the book was my property until I accepted his sale, and therefore, if I didn't want to sell him the book because it would get destroyed as a book, and as his current owner, I had that right to choose who to sell to. The fellow left angrily, and of course I never saw him again, nor did I even know his name. But at least I felt success in saving a nice old book from being ruined. Betsy Shirley came to my bookshop in 1971, recommended by the secretary at Seven Gables Bookshop. She wanted to begin collecting American children's books to instill in her grandchildren the heritage their country presented. She lived in Bernardsville, New Jersey, with her husband Carl, and came from a great family of collectors and philanthropists. For more than 3 decades, we helped her build a world-class library. When she and her brother were children, their parents bought them part of a small island to play on, off the East Coast. It is called Nantucket. Her brother, Walter Beinecke Jr., significantly shaped Nantucket's development by strategically purchasing properties and redeveloping the island, particularly its waterfront and historical districts, transforming the island into a luxury vacation destination. Their mother was a Sperry of Sperry Hutchinson, perhaps best remembered from promoting S&H green stamps, and their father was a Beinecke. Betsy's children's book collection is now part of the Beinecke Library at Yale University. Once her collection began getting donated to Yale in 1989, the Internal Revenue Service simply saw an elderly couple giving boxes of old children's books as donation and getting tax credit worth several $100,000. So they located a local appraiser in New Haven, which advertised in the Yellow Pages as handling household effects, and got their advertisement eventually extended to now include also old books and manuscripts. And this appraiser challenged challenged the Shirley donation. But of course, the appraiser did not understand the subtleties of handling rare books. He looked over the paperwork and thought Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens were 2 different people. And in citing the abbreviation for octavo as 8VO, he wrote as in his IRS challenge that Mrs. Shirley was claiming she had 8 volumes of one title, when in fact, there was only 1 volume. His credentials included membership in the Manuscript Society, which at the time only required a $35 membership fee to join. Mrs. Shirley had the idea of registering her dog, Captain Horatio Hook, as a member of the society, and she would be his corresponding secretary. But Betsy's lawyer advised the IRS what was going to happen. Betsy had framed the membership card for the dog with his photograph and was going to produce this as evidence of qualifications of the IRS appraiser. Quickly, the the government wisely dropped their challenge. Betsy was elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society in October 1982. In addition to Mrs. Shirley, another AAS member I was fortunate to have as a client was Lloyd Coatson. Back in the 1950s, His father-in-law had a small regional company in Southern California named Natone, operating a series of beauty salons for the film industry. They began selling a liquid glycerin soap, which would easily rinse off the skin, and they also produced this product in small bars, initially promoting the benefits to the medical profession, distributing free samples uh, to dermatologists all over the country. It was a brilliant idea, and soon the business expanded from other states and eventually the entire country. In 1962, the country changed its name to Neutrogena, and Lloyd became its CEO. He was elected a member of AAS in October 1985 and donated his international collection of rare antiquarian children's books to his alma mater, Princeton University, in the 1990s. Among the great treasures in the collection were illustrated picture letters by Beatrix Potter, written primarily to the children of her governess, Annie Moore. Most of these came up for auction in Salisbury, England, and Mr. Coatson, with his wife Margaret, met us in the UK in hopes of trying to negotiate a purchase of the correspondence prior to public sale. But that was not accepted. So for the auction itself, Lloyd sent me and my partner, Dennis David, to attend the sale on his behalf. Of the 27 picture letters being sold, he selected a dozen, which he indicated as must-haves. And as far as budget, he allocated $1 million. If it were possible to purchase additional letters, he said, that would be a bonus, but those 12 letters we must acquire. So we sat near the front of the podium, and Dennis was keeping track as how much money I was spending as we bid away. And gradually, letter by letter, came up for sale, and we bought it. We ended up buying all 27 letters, though at times we were far above our anticipated budget. The local newspaper reported the next day on our bidding. Though not realizing Dennis was Filipino, they described the sale as demonstrating strong Japanese interest. Jack and Linda Lapides I have known for half a century. We first met at the local Baltimore auction that had some old children's books to sell, and we sold them most of the original ink drawings by Mary Shepard to the first edition of Mary Poppins, which I had just brought back from a London auction. I remember at the time Linda was somewhat embarrassed that they were spending $25,000 on this set of pictures, and she asked me to please never identify themselves as purchasers. For many years I understood it was kept wrapped up under their bed, but more recently it has now been donated to Johns Hopkins University Library, along with other 20th century children's books from their collection. Jack was a state senator from Maryland for a quarter century, elected to AAS in October 1981, and served on its council for many years. His wife, Linda, was a children's books librarian at Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore. Elected to AAS in 1989, and most of their earlier American children's books have been donated to the American Antiquarian Society. I will always treasure our friendship, as when my partner Dennis David received his American citizenship, Jack arranged for Dennis to receive the American flag that flew over the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on that very day. He is often remembered for such acts of kindness. Another fellow member I worked with closely was a wonderful lady from Cleveland named Ruth Adamite, elected to AAS in October 1983. She wrote the bibliography on miniature thumb Bibles, less than 4 inches tall, and assembled a great collection of Lilliputian books, which are now housed at the Lilly Library in Bloomington, Indiana. All collectors are eccentric in one form or another, and Ruth was no exception. Her preferred method of transportation was by bus or by driving her antique automobile. We represented her at the Christie's London auction of Arthur Houghton in December 1979, where his miniature book collection was being sold. And although there were lots of competition, we succeeded in purchasing about 30 lots on her behalf, which totaled close to $70,000 if you converted British pounds into US currency. Following my return home, we offered to send the books to Ruth via Federal Express, but she wasn't happy at the thought of trusting her latest purchases to a courier and decided she would come into New York City herself, where we had a bookshop, to pick them up personally. We gave her the total amount that she we gave her the total amount due so she could organize a bank check or wire transfer. And within a few days, she arrived on a Greyhound bus. She took a taxi directly from the bus station to our store and arrived with suitcase in hand. How happy she was with all the things we had bought for her collection. And after she looked at everything. She commented, now she was ready to pay her bill. To our surprise, instead of giving us a bank check, she opened her suitcase, and it was filled with money. Bundles and bundles, not only hundreds of dollar bills, but $50 bills and $20 bills and $10 bills. Of course, we had to bring all this paper money to our bank to get it deposited and converted into British pounds to pay at the auction house. But it was her way of doing business. And when all the money had been counted and acknowledged, she now filled her suitcase with her latest treasures and announced she was heading back to the bus terminal to take the bus back to Cleveland without even spending a night in New York City. As an octogenarian, it is hard to imagine I lived in a world of books for 7 decades. And considering my having had such a diversity of interests, it's been a wonderful life. During my career, both as a collector and bookseller, I have had a variety of single-owner sales with multiple auction houses. Swan sold my Frank Baum and Oz books in 1978. Christie's sold my Lewis Carroll collection in 1998 and my Siam collection in Bangkok in 1999. Sotheby's announced the auction of Lothar Meckendorfer in 1984 and our collection of Dutch modernism in Amsterdam, 2008. Bloomsbury Auctions had several sales for us in London of Chinese Cultural Revolution from 2005 to 2012. Heritage Dallas sold the inventory of my bookshop, JGS Limited, in December 2020 when we closed our store after maintaining an open shop for just over half a century. And they also managed a Maurice Sendak auction in 2023. And this past month, Bonham's New York sold our collection of first edition Hans Christian Andersen, with more than 35 copies inscribed by his author, as well as handwritten letters, signed photographs, and original illustration art. 6 months ago, Freeman Hyman's auction offered part of my remaining collection at their new New York sale room, which they titled Collections of an Only Child, 70 Years of Bibliophile, and will continue to offer mixed sales, including parts of my library, through the remainder of this year. Back in the 1980s, it was possible for me to have Sotheby's London change the date of 2 auctions previously announced because it was not convenient to my schedule. But nowadays, such miracles would be impossible to achieve. I feel very privileged to have enjoyed my life with books and to have had such experience with people that were both collectors, librarians, dealers, writers, and illustrators, even royalty. In 1996, at the London Antiquarian Book Show, Princess Margaret stopped by our booth and asked to look at Edward Lear's original manuscript for his Book of Nonsense, Limericks. As she turned the pages, she commented in a soft voice, "My great-grandmom studied art with him." Of course, she meant Queen Victoria. I cannot imagine any other life providing me such happiness. Thank you. Now, as a small souvenir for those who were physically able to attend this memorial talk for Julian Lapides, Laura Wasowitz will hand out a group of original pictorial announcements designed by Maurice Sendak for the opening of our art gallery, which was one of the first to include children's book illustration art. Before asking me any questions, as is often the habit with these talks, please stay in your seats, and Laura will pass out individual copies of the pictorial invitation as a small remembrance of this evening.
Well, yeah, I think I've covered everybody. Just you. Okay, so everybody. So now you know why it's so great. Maurice Sendak designed this for Justin. How marvelous is this?
And having said that, if you look at the image, we had one challenging problem. It included a picture of Mickey Mouse.
Oh dear.
And the Disney company is very protective.
Yeah.
We needed to get their permission because we published a memorial tribute to Maurice and included this in our book. And they said, no problem, just send us a copy of our permission back when you had it done in 1979. Oh. Of course, no one did.
Oh dear.
And we were actually threatened with having to redesign the beginning of the catalog and take that out. But a very important client of ours, a good client named Peter Solomon, once told me if ever I had any problem with Disney, let him know. He was the firm that sold Disney stock, and he once organized us having a private tour of the Disney World Underground. So I talked with him, sent him copies of the correspondence, and 4 hours later we had permission. Are there any questions that you might like to ask?
And we have a mic to bring around for questions. We can also take questions.
Yes,
Tell us about your interest in Mao.
my Mao. Well, that could
It
mean
seemed kind of out of character.
that can mean a few things. We, as a specialist in antiquarian books, I believe I was the first person to explore in China how to identify a first edition of the Little Red Book. I went to the National Library with my translator, and we interviewed the rare books people there. And they took out from their vault copies, and they showed me, and they explained to me what the book needed to have. And they said that together they've spent 20 years searching for a copy, and they never found any. So they wished me good luck, but that was it. Mm-hmm. Well, that afternoon we went to a few of the secondhand stalls and found out if you simply ask for what you're looking for and you knew what you were looking for, you could buy what you were looking for. We found altogether 3 copies, none of which cost more than $20. We had put the first copy to be sold in the West at the auction at Sotheby's, New York, in 2001, I believe. And they estimated it at $1,000 to $1,500. It ended up doing $13,000. Gradually, more people became familiar with what to look for, and China became more frequently visited. And initially, I was afraid Ellen was asking me about my other Mao. And we had a little Shih Tzu dog, and we named the dog Mao. And I found out afterwards that I was in jeopardy of having my Chinese passport, my Chinese visa removed for naming my dog after their supreme leader. But fortunately, it never got to that.
We have a question from online. Have you dealt in children's books in Chinese? And when did they first get published?
Children's books first got published when books themselves were starting to be produced. It was a matter of teaching the child propaganda, how they should behave, what they should study. We have, in fact, had early children's books in Chinese. I once bought one in Sotheby's from the, the late 17th century. And that is now at Princeton University. With more modern Chinese books, it was very interesting to find books about the evils of America, fighting the happy Vietnamese and the nice Koreans, and consequently, these books as propaganda became widely distributed, and we've sold them to many university libraries as research tools. So children's books come in all forms.
Yes, I guess a related question on children's books coming in all forms. And I realize it's kind of vague, a definition, but what do you consider to be a children's book?
Um, Marie Sendak used to say, he never illustrates for children. He illustrates books that children enjoy. And basically, a children's book is something that you could pick up, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and read articles from it, and learn from it, and enjoy the adventure of learning. When I went to college and graduated, I discovered it wasn't what you learned at school necessarily, what you memorized, all of the series of terminologies and such. Instead, what was important with college was learning how to study, how to research. And to me, everything is research from one day to the next. So that's what I consider a book for children.
Is there a book that kind of got away? In other words, is there a book that you wish had passed through your hands that never did pass through your hands as either a dealer or a collector?
Well, one of the great rarities, probably the most famous rarity in children's books, is the first printing of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865. When it was first published, when it was first printed, I should say, the book was poorly composed with the printing. It was produced by Oxford University Press that mainly did test forms and inventory that would not be read like a commercial book. But because of Charles Dodgson's relationship, I assume, they had Oxford do the printing. After the artist, the illustrator, complained to the author, the book was recalled, and they discovered that altogether 48 copies out of the 2,000 had gotten away. They'd been sent to different people. So Lewis Carroll contacted the different people who he had control of, who he sent copies to, and offered to exchange for a better printing copy, which did happen. Altogether, there were 23 copies known of the 48. There was a 24th from Christ Church College in Oxford, but that disappeared more than 100 years ago, and it's never been found. Of the 23 copies known, the last copy to sell sold for over $2 million. I was able to, in my career, I've handled 4 copies and feel very privileged for that. Dr. Rosenbach, who is probably the most important major bookseller of the 20th century, he only handled 2. But he also handled the manuscript for Ulysses, the manuscript for Dracula, and on and on and on. I try with my reaching, not quite retirement, but reaching the age when I like to think back on everything. I've tried to get almost everything. The one book I haven't handled, but I could have, was a first edition of Max and Moritz by Wilhelm Busch. This is considered the first comic strip as such. But we recently handled the earliest printings of the Grimm brothers, of Charles Perrault's Mother Goose, both American editions, British editions, foreign language editions. So I feel very privileged to have checked off most of my bucket list.
We have another question from online. Do you consider yourself more of a collector or a dealer?
Michael Papantonio of the Seven Gables Bookshop told me many years ago, the best booksellers are the collectors deep down. And Walter Schotsky, who was a great specialist in children's books, he said you could always tell a wonderful bookseller by the way their eyes twinkled when they talked about books. And so I hope I continue to twinkle for a long time.
Well, Justin Schiller, we all hope you continue to twinkle for a long time, too. What a wonderful, wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love hearing about somebody's life of learning and being connected with books and the people who love them. And what a wonderful reminiscence this has been. Look forward to more such conversations. We want to thank also again, please join me again in thanking Linda Lapides for making this possible. It is just a wonderful gift to all of us. Thank you, Linda. And thank you to everybody who's been here this evening, whether you're here in person or on YouTube. Please know that we record these programs and we make them available on our YouTube channel. So please tell your friends about this wonderful talk. They'll be able to watch it too in the next week or so. Our next program is a virtual talk with Bethany Hughes about her recent book, Red Face, Race, Performance, and Indigeneity. That'll take place on Tuesday, May 13th at 7 p.m. We have lots more programs coming up in May and June and July. So please check out our website, AmericanAntiquarian.org. Once again, thank you so much, Justin Schiller, and have a good night.